Hello, dear participants of the section on preserving the linguistic and cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples of the Arctic under globalization. Today's section is held together with the UNESCO chair at NEFU, and the main task is to exchange our experiences, to look for partners in implementing the project of that we presented to the Arctic Council. And today we are planning to have 14 speakers. We have 4 reports from Finland, 1 from Brazil, 1 from Germany, and Norway. There are also reports from Moscow and St. Petersburg. I will present the speakers during the section before I present their reports. And now let me introduce those who are present here in Yakutsk. Here with me we have Lena Popova, who will be assisting me today. He's the senior specialist of the UNESCO chair at Northeastern Federal University. Next one, Maria Kornilova, is the head or director of the Museum of Music and Folklore of the peoples of Yakutia. And Sergei Vasilyev, he will be here shortly. He is the director of 3D modeling lab at our university. And now I give the floor to the referent of the Department of Arctic Development, Mr. Oleg Solikov, Ministry of Development of the Far East and the Arctic. I hope he is with us. It seems like he's not, he cannot join us right now. Then if we have Evgeny Kuzmin, then it's the chair of the Russian Committee of the UNESCO Information for All program, Mr. Evgeny Kuzmin. He is famous for doing a lot of work in and organizing a lot of events on the internet, conferences in Yakutsk, as many as 4 of them. Evgeny Ivanovich, can you hear us? Unfortunately, he hasn't turned his sound on. I think he's having some problems with the sound. Maybe he should reload the app, otherwise the sound won't be back. But we have Mr. Solikov. Okay, then we go back to our previous plan, and I give the floor to Oleg Solikov, the Ministry of Development of the Far East and the Arctic. Hello, dear colleagues, can you hear me? Can you hear me well? First of all, on behalf of the Ministry of Development of the Far East and the Arctic, I would like to greet all the participants of the session. It's a very important event, an annual one, and at the same time, this event is also special because International Arctic Project, the proposal of your university, your republic, and Russia, so there are some decisions being made. Indigenous peoples of the North and the Arctic are those people who, from time immemorial, have inhabited these territories and developed these territories, and they should be taken in account in the first place. And the Ministry of the Development of Arctic is doing all it can to develop these people, and all these measures are reflected in the strategic documents of the Russian Federation as well, in presidential decrees, in the strategy of development of Arctic until 2035. And I would like to note that last week, under Arctic Council, within Sustainable Development Working Group, we made a decision, a preliminary one, to support this project on part of the Arctic Council, Norway. And as per the plans of the Arctic Council, the next session of the Working Group on Sustainable Development, the project of digitalization of indigenous heritage, linguistic heritage in the Arctic, will be considered. This project was presented by the Sahara Republic and by your Yakutsk University, and over the year it's been discussed and worked on with the Arctic Council, and thanks to efforts of your scientists, your teachers, and the Ministry for the Development of Arctic of the Sahara Republic, such an event is gaining more and more importance. October 26th, 28th, there will be this session of the working group where this project will be considered. And according to the procedure, there should be at least 2 countries considering this project. It's Russia as the applicant, and we hope that Norway will also express its interest in this project. Besides participation of an Arctic country in this digitalization project, the Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North and Far East, RAIPON, are also part of this process, as well as other organizations. And I hope that this project will contribute greatly to development of Arctic, and namely the support of indigenous peoples of the North, and will strengthen the standing in the international arena within frameworks of the Arctic Council. And to finalize, I would like to wish all the participants of this session some prolific discussions, constructive dialogue, and I noticed that this project will also be discussed among others. So this is one of our first steps in this domain, and thanks to you, it's becoming international. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Oleg. And we go to the next one. Is Mr. Evgeny Kuzmin ready and sorted out his problems with sound? If not, then we'll go to the next one. And the floor is given to Gilvan Müller de Oliveira, Professor, Chairman of UNESCO Chair, Language Policies for Multilingualism, Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil. With Brazil, we have an agreement with Santa Catarina University and the Northeastern Federal University as an agreement on cooperation in this domain. So we would be excited to listen to the report of Professor Oliveira. I think we have problems with video again.
Нету, да? На связи.
Он на связи, он запустился.
No, Žilvan is here. He started sharing his screen. Žilvan's presentation will start shortly, so we wait. We cannot hear you, Žilvan. Are you there with us? Probably you have the same problem with your sound. Can we check the sound now? Hello? Mr. Oliveira? We cannot hear you. Oh, now we can hear you. Yes?
We hear you. We hear you. Yeah, yeah. We can hear you.
I'm trying to establish connection to the PowerPoint. Yes. So, good evening. Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes, we listen to you.
Слышим хорошо.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, greetings from Brazil. As said, we work in the UNESCO Chair on Language Policies for Multilingualism and have a cooperation with the chair from Professor Anatoly Zhuzhikov and NEFU. And our main tasks are to research different fields of multilingualism related to sustainable development, mainly in fields like internationalization, intercultural mediation, language education, translation and accessibility, economy and rights, information and communication technologies, and the question of borders and diasporas. Of course, you know, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals don't include directly questions on languages, don't see languages as opportunities for development. So our chair discusses the possibility of introduction of 18th Sustainable Development Goal related to the access and production of socially relevant knowledge in all languages. We are assuming that when a language remains as a vehicle of the production of socially relevant knowledge for a community, it maintains the other vitality indicators important for its intergenerational reproduction. In that case, we can understand social technologies in this field of multilingualism as the modes of ideological and operational reorganization of the state and other institutions, so that different linguistic communities that are part of citizenship can continue to generate knowledge in their own languages. In our experience in Brazil, we have developed in the last 20 years two approaches to that. Just to mention, we have 274 indigenous languages, and in our country are spoken more than 40 immigration languages since the 19th century. So Brazil is one of the most multilingual countries in the world. The first experience is using territorial management for promoting multilingualism, especially through the strategy of co-officializing languages on municipalities or counties. We have in this moment 14 co-official languages in 32 municipalities, and about 100 more municipalities with the potential of co-officializing, creating a network of multilingual municipalities that can give support to each other in the promotion and in keeping multilingualism. These languages are spread all over the country, and at the same time, we have another policy, a national federal policy that is connected to the UNESCO Convention for Intangible Cultural Heritage. So Brazil developed a tool for recognizing languages as intangible heritage. We have in this moment 10 languages recognized, and the process for 4 more languages is going on. That's another way of connecting to governance to establish social techniques that make possible the continuity of these languages in the national space. I would like to finish just saying that we see multilingualism more related to repertoires than to languages. How people and communities use different languages for its life and economic production. So if we take this point of view, it's very useful to propose the building of a common framework of reference for indigenous and other minority languages. What is our project for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages? You know, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages began 2022 till 2030. My proposal for our discussion is the possibility to develop a common framework of reference for Arctic languages as well, if you consider that could be an interesting idea. Common framework of references for languages allows the development of social technology for sets of languages and not just for individual languages, strengthening minority languages through an operational alliance, as we can see in the case of European national languages, which are today managed from the Common European Framework of Reference. So that's the idea I bring for discussion. I thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much for your report. And we are now collecting proposals for cooperation, and it's a pleasure that Mr. Oliveira proposed us this kind of cooperation, and of course we will continue it. Thank you. And the next one, as far as we still don't have Mr. Kuzmin, we have Nina Visalova, first Vice President of the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, RAIPAN. This association of indigenous peoples is a co-leader of our project that we presented to the Arctic Council. So we have some fruitful cooperation in front of us. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I ask your forgiveness for my sore throat. I will try to be brief. A little bit, I got cold. The fate of any ethnicity or fate of any language is connected to the fates of our peoples. And as far as people remember their culture and their language and want to use it, only then these languages can survive. I underline the initiative of UN proclaimed in 2019 when it was the year of indigenous languages. And this initiative actually helped us to draw attention from the public, from indigenous society, and from the state to the importance of preserving these languages. And I hope all these discussions at international and national level will help us to protect our cultural heritage. And it's crucial that us, the indigenous people, would help our states to build an effective policy towards indigenous languages. I also want to say that for us, extremely important is following the principle of nothing for us without us. It means then when indigenous communities interact with scientific structures, public structures, who decide what the policy of the state will be in terms of language, always indigenous peoples should be involved themselves. This is key. And of course, we should involve the indigenous people into the processes of revitalization and protection and preserving of this heritage. Only then we will have some results. We have to join our efforts to do that. And the project that was initiated by the UNESCO chair at NEFU, the digitalization of linguistic and cultural heritage, RAIPON, our association, supported this initiative. And today, in the era of informational space, we have to build something new, polycultural environment on the internet, where our languages should be represented. First of all, it's extremely important for the young people, because they are the ones who use internet. Otherwise, if we just teach them traditionally, our languages might be deemed for extinction. We have to use those technologies. And this project of digitalization is so very relevant in this sense. So let's join our hands in order to fill this database with our information, our knowledge about languages and cultures. And our association in its activities is guided by priority direction. And one of the key of such directions is the preserving of linguistic heritage of our people. The association already held two sessions of teachers of indigenous languages. We already held contests for indigenous languages. We published two collective books in indigenous languages, also a book in English, which will be presented at international platforms. These are works of young authors who write in indigenous languages. We have to raise awareness about our languages. We have to make them visible. And prior to the decades of indigenous languages, we have to correct all our plans to fit them to the situation. In Russia, we have the organizing committee of this decade, and there were a lot of very good large-scale events held, but there are some drawbacks as well. For us, it's important when we hold all these symposiums for conferences, we don't have to forget the practical side of things. We have to attract attention to improving our methods of teaching of indigenous languages. We have to take care of the teacher themselves and the speakers themselves, and to also have some events to support initiatives of the indigenous peoples themselves. So our joint result of the entire community, including public, civil society, academia, I think we will have results only if we do our best to make young people want to speak. That will be the criterion of how successful or useful our work is. That's why we have to take care of teachers, really, because teachers are the resource that will make it happen. And of course, the state should take responsibility for preserving linguistic diversity and cultures of indigenous peoples of the North and the Arctic. And when I speak about Russia, we have to create conditions for preserving environments. Languages and cultures will be in demand only if the environment is preserved, because this is the environment where language and culture lives. We cannot underestimate indigenous peoples themselves. So our task in preserving languages should be in the focus. Languages are not dying by themselves. They only die when we stop talking them. When we say, no, I don't want to speak this language. So the task of our association is also to support the initiatives to make the representatives, indigenous representatives, to have and to feel this personal responsibility for passing their language over to future generations. And despite the measures taken by our states, it's impossible to preserve languages just by public authorities and science. No, we have to have the indigenous initiative here. We have to incentivize speakers of those languages, spoken languages. Sometimes the standardization of our languages kills the desire of our young people to use their own languages. We have to reach out into the new technology. We have to have our languages there. Unfortunately, only publishing books is not enough. We have to apply a diversity of approaches. And the role of the indigenous peoples is important. Sometimes they are passive in fighting for their rights, and this also counts. And at the end of my message, I would like to read you out the lines from Even writer Andrei Krivoshabkin, who said, the peoples of the North and the Arctic have one very mighty strength that comes from times immemorial and that keeps them safe in this world. It's their mother tongue. Let's save mother tongues and we will save the people. So today is so topical. It's our common interest, dear colleagues, the academia, wide public, the state, before the coming decade of indigenous languages. We have to join efforts to make indigenous people stand stronger in all domains, incentivize them at all levels, in all spheres, and to support their preservation of their languages. Thank you very much. Of course, we will continue cooperation. Of course, we hope for this project will get support and we will get to work. Next is Mikhail Pagadav, Deputy Minister for the Development of the Arctic and Affairs of the Peoples of the North of the Sahara Republic, Yakutia.
Thank you, Anatoly Vasilievich. Hello, dear friends. We're all in different time zones. That's why it's hard to say good morning or good evening. But I'm very glad that this Northern Sustainable Development Forum has brought together so many people who support the languages of indigenous people. So on behalf of the Ministry of Development of the Arctic and Affairs of the Peoples of the North, let me greet all of you and tell me briefly about the work that we are conducting here in Yakutia, together with our colleagues, with the government of the Sahara Republic. A few words about our ministry. So, our ministry has been established not so long ago, in 2013, and the main aims is to establish and coordination of the state policy to develop Arctic regions of the Sahara Republic, as well as promoting sustainable development of the indigenous people. So these are two main directions that we work on. And of course, support of indigenous people is a very important direction of our state policy. Very often, experts talk about that the Sahara Republic is one of the leaders in Russian Federation on supporting, on preserving rights of indigenous peoples. Indeed, in our republic, we have a very big experience. We have law jurisdictions that allows us to solve issues in preserving languages, in preserving and developing culture, and preserving their cultural way of life. I'd like to say that in our republic, we have the system of state regulation. We have a council on language policy. We have a council at the head of the republic on the issues of indigenous peoples. And as I said, we have more than 20 different laws that control interests and rights of indigenous peoples and their languages and their culture. I need to say that as for languages, these rights are in the hands of the Ministry of Education of the Sahara Republic. In the Republic, we have scientific language policy to preserve and develop languages of people of the North. We have this acting state program on studying, developing cultural and official languages of the Republic. And in the frameworks of this project, we prepare new human resources who could teach native languages. We have different projects that study languages of the indigenous peoples. We publish scientific and educational books. We do a lot, and the ministry of the government of the Sahara Republic does a lot on this direction. So now our ministry is cooperating with federal organizations. As Oleg Salikov has mentioned, together with the Ministry of the Far East and the Arctic, we together work on creating programs of children of the Arctic, which also includes studying languages and publishing different student books on native languages. In the frameworks of this work, we also would like to create a federal educational portal which would aim to preserve languages. We need to say that we have a separate state program on developing the Arctic and their culture of the indigenous people. And we have a chapter which is dedicated, and we have our other programs entitled Children of the Arctic and Teachers of the Arctic. So these two are very important directions of our state policy. because only when we have competent and educated teachers, we will be able to share, to transfer our knowledge to the younger generation. We need to say that in the Russian Federation, we have a big system to prepare teachers. And we have the Institute of People of the North in St. Petersburg, where our teachers study. And the Sahara Republic is the region where the system of nomadic schools is developing. This project was supported by UNESCO. And I would like to quote the words of our scientific activist, Vasily Robikov, when he said that education for indigenous peoples of the North is important without their cultural way of life. Mostly our people, they lead this nomadic way of life. And to give children the education, we need to create a different system, a totally different infrastructure, which unfortunately doesn't fit federal standards. That's why, along with the colleagues from other regions, we need to work on it more. However, we have other successful examples. For example, we have schools. We have representatives here as well. And Nina Moiseyeva, I can see you. It is experimental boarding school in Nerengri, where children of indigenous people study from different Arctic regions, from other regions of Russia as well. It is a very important school which needs to be supported, and we need to develop such model. And this year, International Arctic School has opened, which will prepare children to work and to develop Arctic regions. And I'd like to say a few words about our ministry. It supports the project initiated by the Department of UNESCO on digitalization of languages and their culture. We have funds to support this program using grants and subsidies that we give to the organizations of indigenous peoples and to other public organizations. Every year, we hold competitions of grants, and we give money, we give funds to different projects of our indigenous peoples, to the communities. We have a lot of interesting projects there, and now the youth has got very active in this field, especially in the field of studying native languages. That's why, as a ministry, although we are not responsible for the languages, I'd like to say that we need to look at this issue in a complex way. We need to save the languages, save the culture, save the traditional way of life. Despite all of this, we have many issues. We don't have many native speakers. We have less and less of them. As Nina Glebovna has mentioned, everything depends on the native speakers themselves. As we say, the UN has announced the year of the indigenous people, and probably will need many years to stop the process of language extinction. And I hope that this project of digitalization of languages will get support of the Arctic Council, and we will cooperate with all circumpolar countries and with other countries as well, which are interested in preserving languages. We'll be able to share our experience, to create the networks, and work together on this problem. And I hope we will reach our goals, and we'll create this portal where we'll post different materials on languages, culture, their traditions. And to conclude, I'd like to say that knowledge, traditional knowledge of indigenous people, their languages, preserve only there where they are used. That's why, if we want to preserve, develop languages and culture, we need to First of all, we need to develop traditional way of life where these languages and this knowledge can be used. So we need to talk about the complex approach. We need to develop traditional herding, hunting, fishing, and so on. And all of this can be a base to develop our nationalities, our cultures and languages. Without this, it will be hard to talk about preservation at all. If we are taken out from our roots, from our land, it will be very hard to preserve all of this. So I wish all of you a very fruitful work on our forum. We are open for cooperation, and I hope today we will discuss many different ideas, we'll make friends, and we'll work together on this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mikhail. The next reporter, let me introduce him. It's a complex. It's a professor from University of Tromsø, Norway. When we applied, Norway became a leader of our project, and Professor Testrud and Jargal Bardagarov, they coordinate this activity. That's why we give the floor to them. Who's here? Oh, thank you very much. Now I'd like to share my screen.
Сейчас. Мы вас видим.
We can see you. I'm having troubles sharing my screen, but give me a second. Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to take part in the forum. I would like to discuss today linguistic technologies, because we're doing it on a professional basis. And let's talk about basic language technologies. I will have a presentation in English and I will be speaking Russian for your convenience. Is it okay? Basic language technologies for circumpolar region languages. I represent the language documentation and language technologies theme network of UArctic. Me and Trond, we are the founders of this network. We have to say in the first place that basic language technologies are really crucial, and they are key for adaptation of indigenous languages in modern real world, which has wide access to information and communication technologies. I think everybody understands that. This is the main thesis of my report. So I took this one from Wikipedia. What is a language technology? It's a very complicated thing connected with automatic recognition of text, computer thinking, of computer understanding human speech, something very complex, it seems to us. But there is a dichotomy, a basic versus advanced. It's actually very useful, and it's pretty instrumental dichotomy, because it could be important both for developers and for those who are making laws. Here we divide the technologies into two main elements. Basic technology that are relatively easy to develop and it can be done fast, and some advanced technologies that are not that easy to develop, that require a huge amount of data, a lot of people involved, different modern technologies always changing, and you need to have experts. So these basic technologies, this relation, the ratio between complexity and usefulness is maximal. They're very useful and very easy. So what are basic language technologies? First of all, it's standardized. It's better to be standardized Unicode-based symbol repository. And the second is standardized keyboards for different platforms, starting from mobile platforms, which is very relevant for today, and ending with some other standards, like operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac OS, etc. So what problems we have here? Standardization. We have to standardize, and we realize it, but in our country all standards are aimed at standardizing Russian language. But if we talk about other languages, are they just first steps or not done at all? We still have a lot of experience of developing standard orthographies for the majority of languages, but so we can use it as a base. There are some standard repositories of symbols that were developed during pre-digital era. We can take them as a stepping stone and then evolve them into Unicode. I think it's a feasible task, and we can do it together, and we can include it into the list of the priority tasks within this decade, for example. And I think it should be done for all of the languages of the Russian Federation, not only Arctic languages, but all of them. Another problem is that Unicode standard and in general the keyboards, they are not supported by the majority of operation systems. Large international companies who supply us all of this, they don't care for their product to be compliant with smaller tasks, because they consider these languages as minor, probably that's why. And we somehow should change that, should change this prejudice that it's not worth doing, it's not strategically important. We have to get rid of this approach, and I think the companies themselves can also move in this direction. They can change their policies, and we, as public, we can do some pressure on them through international organizations as well. Good reputed organizations such as UNESCO, UN. At the same time, the governments of the states should have concerns in legal support of these measures. They should deal with legal. So all of the products that is sold in the country, for example, should have a possibility for every language to type. So every citizen of a country should have the possibility to type on any device that he is buying within his own country, their own country. And as an example, I would like to bring Sberbank. It's the national bank of Russia. When you want to transfer money to somebody and you want to write something as a message, for example, in Buryat language, it's impossible. Recently, the application was renewed, and right now you can actually type this. It sends you to another screen, but at that screen, instead of symbols that are not within standard Russian Cyrillic alphabet, there are just question marks. In the previous version of the app, it was saying just, you cannot use symbols that are different from symbols of Russian language. So this is the state policy of the state bank. I mean, we have to be very attentive at the level of national companies, and at least all of these applications should be able to use expanded Cyrillics. This is how it's called. Possibilities. So for majority of users, they do not need Alexa, Alisa, Cortana, etc. For example, in December of this year, at UNESCO conference in Paris, the bulk of the time was consumed by representatives of companies who told us, oh, how good is Alexa, how good is Alisa. Nobody needed that. For 99% of languages of the world, still have a long way to go before they can embrace these technologies. So let's focus on basic technologies. Machine translation is also great, but we can survive without it. Spell checkers, they are useful, yes. But in many communities, there are problems with orthography, the spelling, because they still don't have those standards of spelling. So that's a whole different process. We cannot focus at it now. It's not a basic linguistic technology. So 100% necessary technology is a keyboard driver, which would allow the possibility to enter the symbols of a language. And this range of symbols should be stipulated. It should be some of the basic symbols of Unicode. Such keyboard opens a lot of possibilities. For example, in our time, what do? We download Viber or WhatsApp and start to communicate. So if you don't have your keyboard in your language, many users say, I don't like it. Let's use Russian language, for example. Another example, the keyboards open a lot of possibilities for the young people. In Yakutia, for example, I know it's very well that there are a lot of young software developers who are coding in their native language. They could actually code also for Yukagir or Chukchi or Even or Evenki children, but they cannot because they don't have the keyboard. So if this possibility will be built in by default, that would be much, much easier. So these are my thoughts when I was getting ready for my speech, and I think this is my main idea, is that basic linguistic technologies, they are important, and we have to differ basic from advanced. It will give us more efficiency in solving the tasks that stand before the indigenous languages currently, right now. So I think everything is clear, and I can answer your questions. Wow, thank you, Jargal. It was a very interesting presentation. Many indigenous peoples don't even have those symbols in Unicode. And to insert them into operating system. Yes, it's very relevant. Of course, we will continue cooperation in this field, and the next is again a joint report from representative of Finland, Anna Stamler-Grossman and Francis Joy. Anna Stamler-Grossman is University Researcher of University of Lapland, Arctic Center Coordinator of the Arctic Studies Program. And her paper will be the first one, and then will be Francis Joy. Please, Anna.
Hello, everybody, and warm greetings from Finland. I'm a social anthropologist at the Arctic Center in Finland, and my research sites and fieldwork have covered different regions across the Arctic and Antarctic. My main interests lie in the research on local communities' adaptation to environmental and social changes, human nature, human-animal relations, indigenous and non-indigenous identities. In my introduction today, I will briefly pinpoint the importance of cultural legacy for indigenous peoples from anthropological point of view, and my colleague Francis Joy will continue this topic in more details on the example of rock paintings in Finland and their meaning for Sami people. So here is my first point. Linguistic and art heritage is among the most tangible symbols of group identity. Many indigenous communities assert that their language and culture is at the heart of what makes them unique in the context of dominant cultural surrounding. The second point, language and art are our environmental memory, a repository of human nature intimacy in the context of changing environment. There are several knowledge gaps that are not captured by written records. And like an archaeology, linguistic and art heritage also help us to understand how and why human nature relations and behavior have changed over time. And my third point is, so moreover, language and culture specific practices related to spirituality are considered as a positive contribution towards health and as a protective factor in buffering against health risks in indigenous communities. So to conclude, I would say the key to cultural practices preservation lies in their intergenerational transmission. And as Mary Norris stated,
Извините, вас не видно. Можно как-то там на экране вас не видно, к сожалению.
Sorry,
Unfortunately, we cannot
мое
see
видео
you.
не работает, к сожалению. It doesn't work,
Unfortunately, my video is
so, but
not
I just
working.
conclude my last sentence is,
But
the younger the speakers, the healthier is the language. So in this sense, our cultural heritage is not only repository as a store of knowledge, but also repository in terms of source of knowledge for future generation and sustainability at large. Thank you very much, Mikhail. Спасибо. And now Francis will, my colleague will continue.
Спасибо.
Yes, hello, and good afternoon from Rovaniemi. My name is Francis Joy. I'm originally from the north of England. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Lapland Arctic Center in Rovaniemi. And I've been mainly working for the last 10 years on the study of Sami religion in both collaboration work and individual field work. And I wanted to bring a very, very important topic into the discussion this afternoon in relation to the work that I've been doing, which surrounds the prehistoric rock paintings in Finland, which are a source of not only cultural heritage and environmental heritage, but also linguistic heritage, a subject matter that is not really discussed so much in academic discourse. So I'd like to invite you to just take a look at the map that I've put in the box here. We have a map of the location of many of the rock paintings that you see in Finland that are predominantly by water, mainly in the central and southeastern parts of the country. As is the case, 2020, we have around 142 sites, number of prehistoric sites, 122, locations with identifiable figures, 103, locations with no identifiable figures, 19. The controversial dating, there's 12 sites, and painted locations with uncertainty, that's 8. And there are 4 identifiable themes in the rock paintings: dance, flying, boats, horn figures, and the X symbol, which are connected together. To give you some idea of the sort of topography or sacred landscapes that you can find around Finland where these rock paintings are present, not all at the sites, but many of them, you can find these anthropomorphic and zoomorphic natural stone features. Here you can see on the left side, you have a place near Suomussalmi called Varakallio, and to the left, you can see there's a large stone face in the rock. To the right, you can see at the bottom there by the bridge, by the water, the coloured area, the panel, which is approximately 11 metres long. In the centre, we have another site in Kouvola, in the southwest of the country, and then also in the southeast of the country, Astavansalmi, which is approximately 7,000 years old. To give you some idea of some of the content or contexts that the rock paintings appear within, we have dance and flying, and also here another picture of dance, scenes from trance and shamanic, what we know as shamanistic terminology as states of ecstasy. All of these are just above the water. And then to continue in relation to boats and X symbols, on the next slide, you'll find in central Finland, Jyväskylä, there is a site called Sahara, where we have at least 9 boats, here about 10 meters off the ground. Below that, we have X symbols in different contexts from various sites around Finland. And then in the center, we have an anthropomorphic figure who's possibly holding a reindeer antler or something similar, who has horns. And then at the far right side, there's 2 examples of vandalism that's been caused at sacred sites. We have the top picture where you can see has been painted over completely by graffiti. And then on the bottom right side, you can see the circle there, which is rock paintings that have been destroyed through the use of a shotgun, that they've been blasted away at some point. And what makes this very interesting is that particularly some of these figures that are flying and some of the triangular headed figures that you can see here and the figures with horns are also consistent with spiritual figures from Sami cosmology that are depicted on drums from the 17th century, typically from Finland and Sweden. And so some of the main questions in relation to preservation of linguistic research is that what kind of values does rock art have as the oldest written language, where symbolism, which is place-specific, i.e. in the Arctic, is used as a system of communication. The second point is how can we better understand the relationship between rock art and anthropomorphic stone boulders in relation to different forms of communication. And the third aspect is what kind of linguistic expressions are found in rock art, which are linked with cosmology and spiritual practices such as shamanism. And why are these important in relation to better understanding cultural heritage? Now, what makes the case in Finland in relation to rock painting research quite unique is that the majority of these paintings have only been discovered since the 1960s, unlike Sweden and Norway, where you have around the 17th century. And also that making the research quite new. And what also makes it unique is that in the south and southern parts of Finland, the Sami people have a prehistory. And again, research into this in relation to the Sami people is quite new. And one of the reasons for that is that the Sami have not been included in earlier research into these rock paintings. Thus, the potential for joint cooperation, which would really maybe hopefully open up further dialogue and further understanding. So just to close, the point I really want to make is that the rock paintings are not really understood and seen as the first written language. They're more seen as they're being used in tourism as tourism attractions, despite being protected by the Antiquities Act from 1963. Vandalism is quite widespread in different places because there's no restrictions. Anybody can get access to them at any time, except on the ones that are on islands, but still boats. And in the wintertime, snowmobiles can be used as a way of getting access. We also have rock paintings that have had fires lit underneath them and by them, etc. So there's a massive potential for study. The current archaeological research is discussing sound in relation to rock paintings and sacred sites, but this concept of it being the first written language that we have in Finland is very, very under investigated. As I've noticed, this is the case in many Arctic cultures. So I thank you for your time and bring the presentation to an end. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much.
Доброго времени суток, уважаемые
Hello,
участники.
dear
Далее, так
participants.
условно сказать, вторую часть
And the
нашей
second
сессии
part
буду
of our
модерировать
session,
я.
I
Меня
will
зовут
be
Попова
moderating
Лена
it. My name
Николаевна,
is
главный
Popova
специалист
Lena. I'm
международной кафедры
the leading
ЮНЕСКО.
specialist of the
Во-первых, я
UNESCO
хотела бы
department. First of all,
поблагодарить
I'd
наших
like to thank
участников,
our
спикеров,
participants,
которые
speakers,
согласились и активно
for
работают
agreeing to take part
сейчас в
in our
сфере
session
сохранения
and
и
who are working
языкового и
very
культурного
actively
наследия
in
коренных
preserving
народов Севера
language
и
and
Арктики,
cultural heritage
что
of the
является
Arctic,
действительно очень
which
сложной
is
и
a
трудной
very
задачей
hard
в условиях
task to complete
изменения климата
in the
и
conditions of
глобализации.
the
Спасибо
climate
вам
change
за
and
это. И
globalization.
спасибо
So thank you
слушателям.
for that, and thank you, dear listeners.
Следующее слово я хотела бы
Now I would like to give the
заведующему
floor
кафедрой
to the
международной кафедрой ЮНЕСКО Северо-Восточного
head of
федерального
the
университета
NEFU UNESCO
Анатолию
Chair,
Васильевичу
Social and Human
Жожикову.
Adaptation of the Arctic Regions,
Пожалуйста.
Anatoly Zhozhikov.
Проект цифровизации языкового культурного
So the
наследия.
project of the digitalization of the cultural heritage that we're discussing now, we started it in 2011, and Yukagir people contacted us since there are not many of them, their language is extinct, and that's why we started to work in this direction. And Ludmila Zhukova and Shadrin Vyacheslav contacted us, and we started our project with Yukagiris. We have only several of them, at least 2 or 3 native speakers of Yukagir language, and that's why we started the digitalization. And we can say that today their language is digitalized and we have a chance to preserve their culture. Then we started to broaden our project across the Republic and the Far East, and now we have reached the Arctic Council. And I'd like to show you my video, how we started our work, what we have been doing, and then maybe you will not have questions.
Each language is a unique storage of information about the ethnic group using it and its culture, about the evolution of the language itself, as well as the nature of man as a biological species. The history of humanity saw the appearance of one languages and the extinction of others. However, in the context of globalization and formed information society, the process of language extinction has grown to alarming proportions in the recent years. According to the pessimistic forecast of UNESCO, with this rate, only about 10% of the currently existing languages would survive by the end of the 21st century. The challenge of our time is the preservation of traditions, cultures, languages, and traditional ways of life of indigenous peoples of the world, including the Arctic peoples and their representation in the global information space, in the new multicultural environment of communication of the 21st century. This is particularly important for the indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia, and the Far East, whose languages and cultures are already on the verge of extinction. There are very few native speakers and culture barriers. Therefore, our urgent task is to record their languages and cultures in the digital media and to introduce them in the global internet for future generations and for those who want to study, preserve, and develop their native language. The Center of Digital and Cultural Heritage of the Nephew Yakut Global University deals with this important and urgent task. Project Goal: to introduce linguistic and cultural diversity of the indigenous peoples on the digital media and in the internet. To create a virtual environment for communication in their native languages on a single multilingual Arctic portal. During the first phase of the project, from 2011 to 2013, the field trips to places of compact residence of indigenous peoples of the Sahara Republic Yakutia were organized to take video and photographic evidence of endangered native speakers and culture barriers. Yukagir, Dolgan, Events, Evenki, Chukchi. The collected material is used in two ways. Firstly, the creation of digital educational media DVDs on the languages and cultures of indigenous peoples. Secondly, the creation of public multilingual portal for indigenous peoples. The center produced 10 informative educational DVDs on languages and cultures of the indigenous peoples, developed a mega portal of indigenous peoples where all the available materials have been already posted. The Yukagirs were the first to have been digitized and recorded on the thematic educational CDs, as well as introduced on the internet. The chairman of the Yukagir Council of Elders, Vyacheslav Shadrin, will tell a few words about this project. Since 2011, the Association of the Yukagirs of the Sahara Republic Yakutia and the Yukagirs Council of Elders have been cooperating with the Nephew Center of Digital and Cultural Heritage and implementing one of the most successful projects on preservation of the Yukagir language and culture in cyberspace and on digital media. This project has resulted in the release of 18 CDs. Some of them are textbooks to study the Yukagir language, such as phrasebooks, dictionaries, voice recordings of various manuals in Yukagir. It is very important nowadays because we have few native speakers left. Another part of the discs represent digitized archival materials that were stored in private collections. The rest of the materials are materials on preservation of the Yukagir culture, its promotion and popularization. We do hope that the joint project with the Center of Digital and Cultural Heritage will continue and make a great contribution to the preservation and promotion of our culture and language. The work in this area has shown a great demand for the project, not only in the Sahara Republic Yakutia, but also in the other regions of the Russian Federation, where representatives of indigenous peoples live. In March 2013, this project was presented at the 7th Congress of Indigenous Peoples of the North, Siberia and the Russian Far East in Salihard, and excited great interest and support. In April 2013, the Arctic Multilingual Portal of Indigenous Peoples became a finalist of the Far East Internet Awards Siberian Queen in the section The Best Non-Commercial or Thematic Project in the Russian Far East. The next phase, since 2014, has been marked by the project expansion in the entire Russian Far East. The field trips for recording indigenous peoples on digital media were organized to Chukotka, Kamchatka, and the Khabarovsk Krai. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to cover all these ethnic groups, but in the nearest future we want to present all the indigenous peoples of the Russian Far East on the portal, and in the long run, all the indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia and the Far East. The result of this project is that a single portal of indigenous peoples should become an accessible, informational, cultural and educational environment, not only for indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia and the Far East, but also for the indigenous peoples of other countries.
So the most interesting that we filmed this video in 2014, and now we're talking about our portal becoming an international one, and so that we could post all languages of all indigenous peoples of the Arctic. And in order to keep leadership, we need to have funding most of all. And the leader of our project is Norway, and then Finland and Canada. They also have the desire to become leaders. And I hope that the list of our co-leaders will be expanding, and in Russian Federation we'll be able to talk about this on the federal level. And now we are searching for colleagues and partners so that we could continue our fruitful work. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Anatoly Vasilyevich. Yes, it would be great to make this project a very big one, so that it could include all indigenous peoples of the Arctic, so that we could promote their culture and preserve it. So now I would like to give the floor to the professor of general linguistics of University of Eastern Finland, Mikhail Risler. Good afternoon, Mikhail.
I will speak in English, and now I start sharing my screen, and I hope that it works. Let me see. Whiteboard, Adobe Preview. Yes. Okay. Is my screen visible now? No.
Mikhail, we see you, but not your screen.
Moment. Here.
Yes, now we can see it.
Спасибо. Okay, so I'm very thankful for the invitation to this interesting meeting. I have prepared a few rather programmatic slides to illustrate a little bit my own work, or the work which I'm carrying out together with my team. And I'm a linguist, and in the focus of my research are endangered indigenous languages of northwestern Russia mostly, especially the Sami languages of Russia, but also Komi, and also other languages spoken in the northwest of Russia. And I work in a field which is known as documentary linguistics. And moment. Okay, now you should see my second slide, right? So documentary linguistics, yeah, it's a new name of a rather traditional field, which was earlier known as anthropological linguistics. It has a long tradition, and here for my presentation, I will call this digital anthropological linguistics. So originally, anthropological linguists or anthropologists, they worked mostly in an analog mode. Of course, the equipment they used originally was analog. So when they did recordings, like here on this one slide, you see Elia Lagerkrantz, a Finnish professor, doing a record with a Sami speaker in Norway, and he uses the Edison phonograph. But mostly researchers actually noted down all data they recorded with speakers, so in transcription. And there weren't done so very many recordings at that time. So the research results were published in books mostly. So they consist, for instance, of huge collections of texts in the original language, transcribed in phonemic or script, and normally also translated into one lingua franca, for instance, Russian or another language. Nowadays, still some linguists work in this mode. They use digital technology. They perhaps use the video camera or make audio recordings, but still they are mostly interested in publishing the research results in books, perhaps on web pages, which are digital, of course, but they are not automatically reusable, for instance, by the native communities in this case. And also, these sources are not sustainable very much, although you can, of course, go to a library and find the old books, or you can also use web pages for some time. But in the last presentation, we also saw a lot of CDs and DVDs, and they work fine and they are digital. But the question is, how sustainable are these data on these media? For instance, my computer, which I have here, doesn't read any CD anymore. So I have to use an external CD player. But perhaps in 3 years or 5 years, who knows, there won't be any computer anymore reading DVDs. So the new mode of publication in the new field, which I call digital anthropological linguistics, is more like data-oriented and not so much media-oriented. So the data needs to be, of course, it is digital data. It needs to be structured, and it needs to be stored on media which are now the state of the art. And the data we work with is stored in contemporary digital archives. And such archives exist in various places, for instance, also in Moscow. And and then the data, once it is stored in a sustainable way, it can be always copied into various different media, also DVDs as long as they exist, but also perhaps into new repositories, new archival repositories in the future. And this, the actual goal of this research is to create multi-purpose data, which is reusable both for research, but also for the communities we work with. So I can give you an example of from a project I was involved in. It is the project was called Ishva Komi Documentation Project. So we did 3 years of fieldwork in diaspora Komi areas outside the Komi Republic, and we did audio and video recordings representing culture and also language in these areas. And we created a rather large database of Komi speech and video, so roughly 300,000 transcribed words, which equals roughly to 35 hours of audio video. This is available in a platform which we built together with colleagues in Syktyvkar. It's called Komi Mediateka. It's available in Russian, in Komi, and in English. And you can follow the link and find it there. And this is a little bit similar to what we have just seen in the last presentation. It is a portal, a web page where the data is stored and can be searched and accessed and used. But an important note is that this is what we call a community interface, and also what I've seen in the previous presentation. This is an interface which is working now and most likely also the next years. But this is not a sustainable archive, because web technology changes all the time, and our systems, Microsoft, but also Mac, and they change all the time. And the data stored on such web pages won't be available and readable anymore in only a few years from now on. So simultaneously, as we have these community interfaces, we also need to think about a sustainable archiving of data. But what I want to tell about is not so much the archiving side, but what we now do in our current stage of the Ishva Komi project, where we already have the database of very many recorded, transcribed words. So now we develop natural language processing. This is, I can also say computational linguistic tools. A little bit we have heard about this in the presentation by Yargal about language technology. So tools which help understanding language or using language. And these tools exist at various levels. And Yargal talked about dichotomy here, that there are more basic tools and more advanced tools. So what we actually do in our project, and this is Komi, which is not a very small endangered language, but which is still endangered, and which can give a very good example for one of the medium-sized indigenous or minority languages in the Russian Federation, which can be worked on in a rather effective way in terms of language technology, I think. So what we do is we develop tools for tagging the grammar. It is analyzing automatically the morphology and the syntax in our speech samples. But we also develop tools for tagging keywords in order to catalog automatically all the data we have recorded. And we have even done work on speech recognition for Komi, which works relatively well already now. So it means that we can give the tool Komi speech, spoken language, and it can transcribe it automatically. There are still many mistakes in the transcriptions. It is not as good as speech recognition works for Russian or for English, for instance. but it will help the future work with the transcribing of all our texts, because then we just need to correct the mistakes and not need to transcribe everything from the beginning. So in order to reach the stage where you have a lot of data, which you can also use for developing language technology, of course, digital anthropological linguistics, the fieldwork, needs modern equipment and skills. The equipment is, of course, digital, and the equipment should really be thought about carefully. But even more important, in my opinion, is that we need contemporary digital methods to reach very good results, which are sustainable and which then can also be reused in the future, in 10 years or in 20 years or in 50 years or in 100 years. And important for these methods are structured databases. So it is not just to record video and audio using what is on the computer, but structure the data so that it can be reconverted and reused in various ways later on, even when the current video file containers are not anymore standards. And we see that these things change all the time very rapidly. So we also need to think about standardized data types when we archive the data. And which is also very important is to have as much as possible open data. When dealing with recordings, people tell about their personal history, and so perhaps not all data is always very easily to make open, but we should go for as much open data as possible. So to summarize a little bit, or to sum up my points made here during my presentation, that digital anthropological linguistics can support the preservation of minority cultures and languages, not only indigenous minority cultures, but in principle minority cultures and languages generally. Of course, firstly, because we document indigenous languages and indigenous knowledge, and these documents can, of course, then be used in various ways. But what is, for me personally, also very important, simultaneously doing this the right way, using innovative methods, this work we do can also help to produce basic language technology. And this is what Yargal talked about: spell checkers, electronic dictionaries, applications for language learning, which are rather basic, but which will help smaller minority groups to make the step into the digital age, like groups like Tundra Nenets, which are not very small, but relatively small in a global perspective, but even Kildin Sami with perhaps only hundreds of speakers today. And if we have more data, like for instance, we have for Kumi, but also Sahara is a rather vivid language still, and also other languages, Bashkir, for instance, they have so many speakers that we could collect so much data that we can even start working on higher level language technology. For instance, machine translation or speech recognition, what we have done for Kumi. So this is not at all unrealistic. Once we have collected a lot of data and also structured it in the right way, that we can work further with it. But this work definitely needs data-savvy methods and workflows in order to produce sustainable and reusable results. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Mikhail.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Yes, using such digital technologies, internet portals, these are the most sustainable sustainable means in the context of our modern world and in the world of globalization. And thanks to such projects, we'll be able to preserve language and cultural heritage of indigenous people. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to give the floor to Makarova Claudia, teacher of the Evenk language and literature at the boarding school Arctic, deputy director on language problems. And I would like to remind our dear speakers that we have only 7 minutes to report. Since we have very interesting reports, we've completely forgotten about the time, so please keep up to this time. Claudia Innokentivna, are you here? Good evening, good afternoon, dear participants of the forum. Please, could you turn on my presentation? So, the topic of my presentation, factors of motivation for teaching the native language at the boarding school Arctic in Neringrad, the Sahara Republic. So the Arctic School is the only institution where children of Evenk people, Chukchi, Yukagir people, Dolgan children, they all live and study together there. They learn Chukchi, Yukagir, Evenki, and Evan languages there. The main aim of the school is identified as creating open educational platform where they could form positive motivation to study native languages, to develop identification, and to develop ethnic cultural heritage. Our school was founded in 1999. Every year, 125 children study at the school from 15 different regions and from different remote areas of indigenous peoples of the Sahara Republic and the Far East. Of course, the main goal of teachers of native languages is to preserve and develop language. To reach this goal, we face very difficult issue to teach a child to speak the native language, to form the motivation to study native language. The most important role is given to the content of the educational program, to organize the educational process, the forms, the methods, and the approaches, and out of classes activity. So what are the ways to form motivation to study native languages? These are choosing the correct sources along with the students, to use modern technologies, using group and collective forms of work. The most popular forms among the teachers are the following ways of studying: e-books, work with demonstrative data, different digital tests, using internet sources, and using slide presentations. Teachers of native language are forming their own student books, their own books and presentations. Students, along with the teachers, also create different materials in the form of digital books, digital programs to learn and to teach the literature of the northern people, their languages, their culture, and the history of their regions. As the experiment, we use modern technologies very widely. For example, networking, communication. We have groups where students can speak their native language, where they can communicate with each other so that they can master their language proficiency. Second is discussions with the native speakers. Children have opportunity to speak with other native speakers and improve their listening skills and to estimate their level of the language. The main task of teacher is to develop needs to use their native language as a mean of communication, as a mean of getting knowledge, and as a mean of social adaptation. Out-of-class activities has several directions. We have knowledge development classes. For example, we have classes such as translator, using in different scientific conferences, competitions, and creative work. We have Olympiads of different universities and other international competitions. So International Olympiad on the native languages is being held from 2015. It was founded by the Department of Foreign Languages at the University of Blagoveshchensk. Morozova Olga is the founder of this Olympiad. Every year, students from Amur schools, from the Sahara public schools, from Krasnoyarsky Krai schools, and other Far Eastern regions participate in these events. On the 15th and 16th of September, we hold the 7th International Olympiad on the language and culture of the Evenk peoples. It is the 7th time, and it is spreading, it is expanding, and this year we had an event online. We had 257 participants, 230 from Russia, 25 children from China, 2 participants from France and America. Most of them are pupils, students of colleges, universities, parents and adults, as well as scientists, teachers, cultural workers, and workers at the preschool education. We streamed this event online. We had experts from Nerengri, Ust-Nuks, who conducted discussions on Evenk language. The competition International Dialogue excuse me, how much time do you need for your report? When I was rehearsing, I had sharp 7 minutes. So the next direction is artistic direction. It's the ensemble work, the creative arts studios, as well as project activity, musical studios. They participate in different events across Russia, in Blagoveshchensk, in St. Petersburg. Unfortunately, we don't have enough platforms to share our experience. And yes, we can't share our knowledge, our experience. That's why I suggest to adopt regional, local, and international conferences for teachers of native languages, so that we could have a joint source where we could have our knowledge. Claudia Nikentivna, are you here?
Клавдия Иннокентьевна, мы не слышим
We
вас.
can't hear you, Claudia Innokentivna.
И интернет позволяет проводить обмен опытом между учителями.
So if we have internet portals for teachers, we could share our experience not only with the teachers of the Sahara Republic, but with the teachers from Russia as well. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Claudia. Indeed, the boarding school Arctic is a very unique school.
Ну, как говорили, ну, как говорится, будущее языка.
And as we say, the future of the language and of the culture is in the hands of the youth. Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation, and we wish you success and development. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to the professor of the University of Eastern Finland, Tero Mustonen. Good evening, Tero.
All right, dear colleagues. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this important forum. I'm speaking to you from a remote community next to Lake Pielinen, so unfortunately the broadband doesn't allow me to share my screen on my iPad, but I will explain some of our work and the main points briefly.
Больше никогда не буду участвовать.
And I will focus on.
Прерывает.
I will focus on the question of Evenki Atlas that we have come up with a tool to preserve and advance the Evenki of Southern Yakutia or Southern Sahara Yakutia. So back in 2004, Snow Change, which is the organization that I lead, was invited to start to work in Sahara Yakutia on questions of indigenous knowledge and climate change. And two regions were chosen by Professor Vasily Ropek to be the work areas. The other one was Lower Kolyma region, and the other one was Southern Yakutia, especially the community of Iengra and the Evenki nomadic camps around Iengra. You can find the atlas at www.evenki-atlas.org. And in this atlas, we have summarized the work between 2004 and 2020. It's available both in English and Russian, and the Evenki are contemplating also translation into full Evenki for this atlas. The central question of why the atlas was chosen to become a digital format was that the use of books and the former way of publishing geographical and indigenous knowledge has to be adapted to the modern times. We filmed and have been collecting with Evenki co-researchers hundreds of hours of material, and therefore we were trying to find a good home and a mechanism to convey these materials at this time that will be then available both in Iengra school for the Evenki themselves and also servicing three main points. One, how does Evenki traditional knowledge and culture look like? Second, how is climate change impacting Southern Yakutia and the Evenki? And thirdly, what kind of changes are in the biodiversity of Southern Yakutia when we link science and Evenki knowledge? And one of those methods by which we were investigating this question was also the inclusion of Evenki place names for the first time in public in a digital atlas. because some of those place names are able to convey change that has happened over long historical time frame, stretching centuries, if not even 1,000 years back in time. And in the contemporary sense, they are also communicating about the necessity and present data regarding land use and occupancy. We are considering this atlas to be version 1.0, and it's an open-ended, publicly available service. And with the proliferation of cell phones and other mobile technologies, we are hoping that the Evenki Atlas will grow rather fast, and Evenki are also one of the future co-owners and authors when the Atlas materials are expanding. Snow Change has also committed to financing and supporting the nomadic schools in Yakutia. Over the past 15 years, we have financed Nutentli and other nomadic school actions in Lower Kolma area, and also made a plan to be utilized in Yengra should the opportunity present itself. And that's really my main point today, that I wish to communicate to this important forum and to the question of digitalization of indigenous cultures of the Arctic. One, we have to, like many other speakers have said, we have to support the land use and presence on the land and capacity to maintain so-called traditional livelihoods, as Minister Pagadav was saying. And secondly, we have to find mechanisms to bring voices and direct indigenous authored knowledge to the present in the ways of the youth and this century. And that's why Evenki Atlas, in our joint work with the Evenki that has now lasted for over 15 years, is proving to be a successful vehicle to do that. I want to also thank my colleague, Professor Tamara Andreeva, and recognize the work of previous, but unfortunately already scholars that have passed on, Professor Anna Murajeva, Keptuke Galina Varlamova, and also the peoples of Yengra that have shared their important knowledge and language and skills over the past almost 20 years now. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Тера.
Thank you very much, Tero. Yes, indeed, Evenki Atlas is a very unique and important project in preserving and developing language and cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples of the Arctic and the North. And I hope that in the future we will cooperate together with you in the frameworks of our projects. Now I'd like to give the floor to Maria Kornilova, the director of the Museum of Music and Folklore of the Peoples of Yakutia, please. Could you please turn on my video? Good afternoon, good evening, dear participants of the Roundtable. I represent the Museum of Music and Folklore of Yakutia. Our museum was founded 31 years ago as a social museum, and it became state in 1991. Our aim, our mission is to collect, preserve, and study knowledge about the traditional way of life, about their about Yakut people, Evenki people, and other people who lived here, as well as popularization of their musical art. For more than 30 years, we've been actively cooperating with communities of indigenous peoples of the North. We not only collect and preserve different data of indigenous peoples, our museum also promotes and holds different international conferences. We hold 5 international conferences about shamanism, about traditions, different music conferences, and the second, third, and the fourth conferences were about the folklore of Pale-Asiatic people. Our museum promotes old holidays of Yakutian people based on different scientific sources that are extinct now. And together with the communities, we remember different holidays of Evenki people, for example, of greeting the sun, as well as the holiday of tundra. We're also conducting the preservation of the languages on audio and video materials. We have established a plan, long-term plan, where we collect different memoirs of people of the art and different scientists who worked with the folklore of Yakutia. We have more than 100 portraits of these activists that are in the museum now, as well as in the Center of the Audio and Video Heritage. One of the priorities of our museum is to publish post videos on the culture and musical heritage of the indigenous people. From 2008, our museum started to create documentary educational videos on folklore and musical lectures. As well, we create different animated films about indigenous peoples. We have workshops conducted by different famous people, different masters of crafts. Nowadays, the staff of the museum created more than 100 video exhibits. I won't list all of them now. I would like to talk about animated films. These are the very first film based on the Olonha by Ayunsky about Nurgun Badr the Swift that was translated into 7 languages. And first doll video animated film was published as well, based on the ancient stories of the indigenous peoples. And we've made 3 videos on the stories of Evenki people, who Akulina, she helped us to collect these stories. And the founder of our museum, Raisa Reshetnikova, won a grant of the Russian Federation to create a film about Yukagir's oral traditions. Thus, the museum creates visual monuments of traditional culture of the people, and it is considered to be as a very modern and innovative museum. We have workshops on videos, languages, and we also publish different books for teachers of native languages, and we have this cycle series of books based on the stories of the indigenous peoples. We have a big story of different projects, and of course, since we have not much time, I'd like to highlight that I hope for the cooperation with you, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. We wish your museum fruitful work and many interesting projects. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Sergei Vasilyev, the head of the Laboratory Center for 3D Modeling and Virtual Reality from the NEFU.
Hello, dear colleagues. I present here the team of many institutions from different cities who are working on the project of preserving material and cultural heritage of the North, the Arctic, and the regions of the Russian Federation. We live in a multidimensional world where every concept, every event is connected to some other events, processes, objects with so many links. And these links are diverse. They are not non-linear, and every event is enriched by other processes that we can see, we can hear. For example, Alanho epic cannot be imagined without description of the characters' clothes, houses, weapons. And that's why we cannot imagine the world of Olonho only as a text or songs. It's impossible. Anyway, it includes some part of material world. If we talk about current cultural events, songs, instruments, dancing, it's always the costume, it's always the utensils. For example, we can describe some cultural phenomenon like choron, the traditional wooden vessel for drinking kumis in the Sahara. We can describe it. We can describe how it is used in cultural practices and events, and say that it's used during Sahara festival of Isech, the festival of milk. You can see here traditional wooden utensils of the Sahara people that is used at such festivals. But the objects of material culture of the Sahara people and other peoples are not very long-living because they come from nature: wood, furs, leather, and it's easy for them to go back to nature, to disintegrate. And how we conserve these objects in the condition that we have them now. So it's our task. This is what we are doing. Here we use the help of state-of-the-art technologies like 3D technologies that allow us to make digital copies of objects. Not just keep the information about the shape of this vessel, but also keep the information about the microscopic details of each object. This choron has already been scanned, and we see the information about its shape, micro-relief, and color. So we call it texture. We also, besides image, we have a tool that allows us to retrieve dimensions, very accurate dimensions, radius, distances, degrees, etc. So these tools allow us to pass on to the next generations something in digital format that will allow to recreate a copy. It will not be an avatar, it will be a 3D copy, which has a lot of information in it. In Yakutia, we have a project called 3D Rarities of Yakutia. Several museums already joined us. The Museum of the Republic, small rural museums, school museums. For example, here you can see some results. This is an image, a polygonal grids with color characteristics and textures already applied to it. We also work with clothes that is conveying a lot of meanings. Other regions joined us in this project, like Chukotka and Magadan. We won the federal grant, and we are now participating in these projects. These are some of the results. And please note, we've seen not the image. Actually, this was the 3D modeling, a simulation. Of course, you can use the augmented reality technologies. Using some graphic marks. This is a graphic tag. And using a regular smartphone, you can see the object as if it is standing in front of you. This is a wooden vessel, and this object is can be called the wedding limo of the past. It was a female saddle for a bride. It is very richly decorated, and in this saddle the bride went to her new husband's house, and this was an inherited item. We also have to take into consideration international experience. First of all, the experience of such museum is like a conglomerate of museum. It's Smithsonian Museum, who launched a special 3D center. Here at top on the right, we can see the mask of a Tlingit tribe that was that underwent the cycle in of 3D in museum, and based on the 3D model and multidimensional device, it was reprinted, and already it went back to the people and already even took part in a festival. Thank you, Sergey. Of course, such 3D modeling allows to secure microscopic details of such objects of cultural heritage. So thank you for your presentation and your work. And our last speaker is Vyacheslav Shadrin, the first vice president of the Association of the Indigenous Peoples of the North of the Sahara Republic. Also, he is the chair of the Assembly of Elders of the Yukagir people.
Today, I would like to tell you about the Yukagir language in the conditions of globalization, problems of preservation, the extinct language. In short, we have Yukagirs from tundra and the forest Yukagirs who inhabit the northern east of the Sahara Republic and the Magadan Oblast. If you look at this map, you will see which regions they inhabit. The most deep green is the more Yukagir people that it has there. So Yukagir language consists of two languages. It's tundra Yukagir language and forest Yukagir language. So the modern language situation is as follows. In total, there are 1,603 Yukagirs, including both tundra and forest Yukagirs. 350 of them consider Yukagir language as their native language. It's only 21.8% of all Yukagir people, and only 311 of them can speak their native language language. But it doesn't mean that they know their language. Most of them, and even these people who can speak it, they know only daily language, simple language. But real native people are less than 20 of them. We call natives those people who think in that language, and among them only 4 of them represent the forest Yukagir people. So we can say that today these 2 languages are really extinct. However, Yukagir language is still trying to develop, and in the informative sphere, the first publication in Yukagir language was in 1965 when the poems of Uluru Ado were published. In 1969, his book of poems was published. This book became the very first book in Yukagir language. And this book was published even before the Yukagir writing was created. We consider the date of creation of the writing of Yukagir language on the April 28 in 1983, when the Council of Ministers of the Sahara Republic confirmed the writing rules of this language. And from the second half of the 80s, Yukagir language started to appear on radio. And in 1993, they started holding radio programs in Yukagir language. And in 1993 as well, in the TV radio station, these radio programs became constant. In 1994, in Yukagir language, Nikolai Kurilov became a founder of the newspaper Chaile Duol on Tundra Yukagir language. From 1999, they started to publish Republican newspapers, Ilken, where some of the pages in this newspaper started to be published in Yukagir language. And from 2017, they release monthly applications, Odun Losile and Waldron. Unfortunately, starting from this year, they stopped releasing these applications. From 2004, Yukagir language appeared in the internet, when the websites were created by Yelena Maslova, and the second website was created by Irina Nikolaeva. She opened online documentation of Kolyma Yukagir website, where they published different materials of researchers about the Yukagir language. And then it appeared on National Library website. In 2011, Nemirovsky opened a web page where he published many different sources on the history of the Yukagir language. On electronic devices, Yukagir language appeared in CD format when the Museum of Music and Folklore of the People of Yakutia released first CDs with the animated films about the Yukagir stories, folklore stories. And in the system of preschool education, Yukagir language started operating from 1978 in the village of Andrushkina, and in Nilemne, children of the kindergarten started to learn this language. As a middle school system, Yukagir language was introduced into school in 1978, but they were facultative classes. But as primary classes, they became in 1993. And in this year, the educational plan of Yukagir language was introduced in the national school. And today, Yukagir language language as a subject is taught in 3 schools of Yakutia, in Andrushkina, Nelemne, and boarding school Arctic. As a facultative subject, it is taught in 4 schools of Kolymskaya, Kazachia, and Cherskaya schools. And in 2007, we hold this UNESCO project to preserve Yukagir language by strengthening the capacity of the Yukagir schools in the places of compact residence. And thus, we published 14 different materials on CD, DVD, and books. And the project that was mentioned by Mr. Zhozhikov, we had this program on preservation and development of the Yukagir language together with the UNESCO department, and we released 18 modern electronic resources on Yukagir language. And I need to mention that if you visit this portal, you will hear the native speech of the Yukagir people. You can hear each phrase by clicking the buttons. It is important that we have these collections both in tundra and forest Yukagir languages. We also publish this data in different websites. For example, here you have stories of people of the north. You can hear each story in Yukagir language. And we have also released a video course of the Yukagir language that was hosted by Anna Tataeva. She holds 40 lessons, each 5 minutes long. They are available in YouTube now. You can watch them there. As a factor that defines a special role of technologies for Yukagir people is it is very important to use new technologies to preserve the language. Why is it a factor? It is because we have so little people and we have 2 different Yukagir languages. We do not understand each other. It is not just dialects, it is 2 separate languages. And as you understand, we're spread on the territory of 7 Arctic regions. And in each region, we have only several natives. And in the remote areas, in some remote areas, we don't have native speakers at all, even though we teach the language in schools. We don't have the language as a functioning mean of communication, for example, in schools. On the other hand, we have active groups of scientific and pedagogical intelligence who conduct a very big work on preserving the language. And their work is supported very widely from the government, from the social organizations, and from other organizations as well. For example, we cooperate with the Museum of the Folklore, with the Northeastern University, and with other organizations as well. And using new technologies will promote us to develop new partnerships. Nowadays, we have the sustainable mobile connection in all the areas where Yukagiris live, and all Yukagir schools are connected to the high-speed internet, which allows us to hold different online classes. And Yukagir language became one of the first languages, one of the first subjects, which is taught online, on distance. For example, in school Arctic, we have only 5 Yukagir people. They study Yukagir language online. The teacher is in Yakutsk, and they study Yukagir in Nerengri. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, this online education became a reality, but I need to say that we were the first one to use such online education. We also conduct education, we also teach Yukagir language and culture in the conditions without any native speakers through electronic resources. For example, in the village of Kazachia, we widely use social networks, for example, WhatsApp groups. Here they teach Tundra and Forest Yukagir languages. We also use social networks as the mean of communication, such as Facebook and other networks as well. And lately, we've started to use mobile platforms. For example, we are developing different games that allow us to to expand the content. On the screenshots, you have the pictures in Russian, but now you can have these screenshots in Yukagir language. So the work is still on, and I hope that our language will be preserved further on. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Vyacheslav Ivanovich. So we started our project, and now I hope that it will get a second aspiration using modern technologies. We understand now that DVD resources are already out of date, and I hope we'll find some new means. And to conclude, I'd like to say that we've listened to very interesting speeches. We see the potential. We've listened to our foreign colleagues, and especially I'm interested in the work of our colleagues from Finland. And I'd like our colleagues from Finland to somehow ask the diplomats so Finland could become a co-leader of our project. The thing is that on the 25th of October, we will be revising our project in Iceland as the part of the Arctic Council, and I hope that Finland could become a co-leader of our project as well as Norway. So the potential is very big. We need to come together, and I think we can make a big contribution into the preservation of language and cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and if you have very important questions, maybe we could discuss them, and then we'll finish our work. So do you have questions, maybe suggestions or recommendations? If you have any, you can send them to our email. We will be receiving also suggestions to cooperate. You can send them all to our email. If you don't have any questions, let me finish our work. Maybe we should ask all the participants to turn on their cameras so that we could make a picture of all of us together from the screen. So please, dear participants, turn on your cameras. I understand that in some regions it is very late, but I hope that we could make a joint picture, all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you for your work, and we'll cooperate further on. Goodbye.